Coming up on the live and interactive ACSA legislative lunch break, Edgar and I will get you all of your latest news and information from the state capitol and CDE with an in-depth analysis on how it impacts you. Plus, School Services of California is in the house today to talk about the May budget revision.
The ACSA legislative lunch break starts now.
And it's just after 1 o'clock. We welcome you on a Wednesday to the live and interactive ACSA legislative lunch break, along with Dr. Edgar Saswata, ACSA's executive director. I'm Naj Alikhan, ACSA's senior director of marketing and communications. Welcome. We are honored to have you with us today. Go ahead and jump into the chat, say hello, and let us know where you're watching from today. Edgar, how are you?
Good. We're sticking with the program here, right? Like it was come tradition. We get on budget day. We pretend to have all the answers, right after it comes out, and then we bring on a guest. Usually School Services to the week after the real answers, right?
I was going to say they're going to give us a more robust analysis.
I'm excited, and we're gonna have we're not hazing our guests is not below us here, right? So we have a newbie today. I'm excited to have Michelle. I know long-term friend and colleague who's going to join us, and expanding our list of guests here. It's not often that somebody from the Sacramento community that we're able to say they're first timer, right?
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. We've been doing this show for 5 years now. Hard to believe that somebody
5 years, really?
5 years.
When's our 5-year anniversary?
It was May 2020 that we came on.
Like, shouldn't we? When's the big party, the celebration? Nothing.
As soon as you give us the budget for it, Edgar, we'll make sure we'll invite all of our old friends over here. Neri was first on the chat today. I do want to point this out because we talk about this all the time. We had our budget broadcast last week, and who didn't join us was Sheldon Smith. What I think
number one School Services of California fan. Right?
Well, I was going to say what I think this means is Sheldon didn't want to listen to us talk about the budget, but the moment that he heard School Services was here, he was going to be first in line.
Sounds about right. I don't blame him. I don't know that I would tune in for us either. But
no, that's true. Folks, yes, Michelle Underwood from School Services of California will be with us in just a couple of minutes. Want to run through a couple of headlines and get your reaction to it. Edgar, we've talked so much about Temecula Valley Unified School District down in Southern California and its school board and their ban on critical race theory. A California appeals court judge has ruled that the district must immediately pause its ban on CRT. Some background for you. Again, we've talked about Temecula Valley for a very long time. In December 2022, the board adopted a resolution, a ban on elementary school textbooks that referenced activist Harvey Milk. Now, the judge said that the vague nature and of the legal standing or academic terminology in the resolution jeopardized its constitutionality. This according to a story published yesterday by The Guardian. The ruling also pointed to the resolution's lack of CRT examples and the lack of guidance for teachers to modify curriculum. So as has been the case over the last few years, there of course will be more to this story. And then Edgar, I've got two stories here on teacher pay and the educator shortage. The first one references a story from a few weeks ago. Reports presented by the National Education Association's annual reports indicating educators still suffered from low wages and a lack of professional respect. We've got that article right there, and we'll put a link in our chat. The finances, the low wages continue to lag behind inflation, according to the reports. Now, in 2024, California had the highest paid teachers, averaging just over $101,000, followed by New York, which was at more than $95,000. And states such as Oregon, Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado, and California all have been increasing teacher compensation. The report also indicates that starting salaries and top pay for teachers and support staff are higher in states with bargaining laws. And we put that into the chat. And Edgar, one final one for you, and I want to make note of a commentary by Heather Kirkpatrick in EdSource on the teacher shortage. She takes us along the journey of a teaching candidate who faced so many challenges, many of them financial. She dives into the successes and challenges with the Golden State Teacher Grant and the impact of the governor's May revision. She also outlines 3 ideas to better support California's teacher preparation timeline. We encourage you to take a look. You may not agree with everything that is in there, but I did want to make note it's worth a quick read. Edgar, I'll just have you comment. First off, the NEA reports talking about California teachers and their average salary, but the salary is still not keeping up with the rate of inflation. And then the teacher shortage article itself also, particularly financial issues, but then so many challenges with the credentialing piece. We've talked about it so much. Educator shortage, just a little bit more proof out there about what the challenges really are.
Yeah, a number of things there that come to mind, Naj. I mean, I think first and foremost, I am glad to hear. Oh, well, I think it's worth stating, and I think it's something everybody will agree with, that educators in general, obviously teachers being the front line, that there's been a long-held discussion there about making sure we make the profession attractive. We're compensating them. I don't know that we're really going to be able to get them their true worth there, but I think trajectory in the right place, and I am glad to hear that California, not surprisingly, is towards that top of that list. I think we've seen, frankly, ironically here, I think I've seen some of the data from school services about just what, even in the last 5 years, that there has been a lot of movement on that front, especially here in California, in terms of increases in compensation. I know this has become a tough part of the conversation at the bargaining table oftentimes. And I think our members, namely districts and whatnot, have been able to show that they've been able to move the needle on that front. With that said, I think the bigger issue that you noted on is these pipeline issues. I love that article by EdSource, by the way, just to look at it from a teacher perspective. What is all the initiatives, the repayment grants, the incentives? What does that look like for your typical candidate, and kind of stepping into those shoes? And like you said, it actually highlights some of those challenges, and in many cases that we still have some work to do on that front.
Hey, I want to make note of this. Our production team in the background just noted that May 27th will officially mark 5 years here of the ACSA.
Well, we better no pressure now, but you threw it out there where the 5-year anniversary show at some point. It doesn't have to be the 27th, but we're gonna have to highlight it here somehow.
We are going.
I'm seeing a legislative lunch break history montage in our future.
I know. See, and this is what I fear greatest about what our production team will do if they put together like a highlight video
I'm sure
of the last 5 years.
I'm sure they're going to pick the absolute best and most flattering pictures of us. I'm sure it's going to be
the most flattering photos in those times when our microphones didn't work or our camera went down. Certainly expect that. Let's go ahead and bring in our guest right now. Michelle Underwood is the vice president over at School Services of California, one of our budget experts, and the very first time she is joining us here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Michelle, it's great to have you here. We're honored to welcome you to the lunch break. Let's just get your initial thoughts on the budget, including Proposition 98 funding and the COLA. I believe the last time John Gray was here, he talked about how you guys had a little bit of an internal wager going on as to what the COLA was going to be. Maybe there wasn't money involved, but at least an internal competition as to who was going to correctly get the COLA. Your initial thoughts on what you heard last week?
Yeah, well, for the record, your former colleague and my colleague now, Megan Bear of ACSA, was the winner of that competition. We have very nerdy competitions here at School Services. So we heard about one of them. I'm on the governmental relations side. We have wagers about how long a particular hearing date is going to go. So, we wonk out over here. And I'm hoping I might make the 5-year highlight reel here today on my.
Be careful what you ask for, Michelle. Be careful what you ask for.
Good. Well, I think when we look at the Proposition 98 budget, it's a sort of it's a good budget in a really uncertain year. And so I think when you put in the context of everything that's going around outside of Proposition 98, when you look at revenues that are, underperforming in 25, 26, and we know how that directly affects Proposition 98, we see how outside of Proposition 98, you're seeing significant cuts, especially in the area of healthcare and Medi-Cal. You're even seeing within education, but outside 98, cuts for CSU and UC, which are, sort of happy that at the May revise, their cut is smaller than it was at the January governor's budget. So I'd say all told, it's sort of one of those, it's about as good as we can expect. We have a cost of living adjustment. We still have proposals to provide more districts with rate 1 in ELOP. We have transitional kindergarten student to adult ratio funding still proposed. We have some of the one-time grants that were proposed in January continuing on. So all that's the good news. Sort of on the cautionary side is how the state's going to pay for all of it when we are having revenues coming in very well this year, but so much uncertainty. That's really the word of really, the last several months. It's the word of 2025 is uncertainty, and how California's economy is going to perform and how that's going to translate into the future. And so what kinds of, these sort of one-time piecing it together LCFF mechanisms are we going to see that's going to hold as we go from this year and into the budget year? So I'd say I'd probably use the word grateful for what the Proposition 98 guarantee looks like and how the governor is treating Prop 98 within a lot of uncertainty. That said, it's also not one of those years where there's a cost of living adjustment that adequately keeps up with the cost of doing business. At 2.3%. It's not enough. We know that locally for you to keep up with your costs. So there's not these great opportunities, but sort of in the context and the big scheme of things, it feels like a pretty good budget for TK-12 education.
Michelle, welcome to your first lunch break visit here. Whatever your colleagues told you about it, this shows. I'm sure it was not true, but nonetheless, I'm really trying hard not to judge our friends at School Services for their budget nerd wagers they have there. But I'll leave that for another day. But to all their own, right?
Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. I know today was a big day for you guys, so especially big thank you, Michelle. I know some of our viewers probably seeing you for the second time. I know you folks just got done with your big post-May revise webinar and trying to break down all of the details. So very timely in terms of you coming on and sharing some of that insight with us. I know we've been getting a lot of the questions last week leading up to the release of the May revise. Since then, kind of what the any of the implications to early education, to the UTK implementation. I know people were wondering when they hear about some of the revenue challenges, is the governor going to move away from, his initial perspectives of really trying to get to full implementation? And we know there's been some challenges, just in the field to get there. Just reset. What did we see in the May revise? Kind of what does it mean for that implementation pathway?
Yeah, so we're at the final year, right, of UTK implementation coming up in 25, 26. One of the things that has been built into transitional kindergarten as we go into full implementation is that adult to student ratio. So currently we're at 12-1. It's moving to 10-1 under current law. You may remember a year or two ago, they took out the language that says, if there's sufficient money, if there's an appropriation, you're going to go to 10-1. Now the language says you're going to 10-1 in 25, 26. If we back up even further behind us, behind the governor's budget, was the Legislative Analyst's Office outlook in the fall, where they said, we don't think any new money needs to go into the system. We think it's already baked in there for that lower ratio going from 12 to 10-1. The governor thought that there was actually a need for additional resources. You all probably would agree with that additional resources are needed to get down to that ratio. At School Services, we said, well, okay, yes, and be aware that that is not currently in statute. There are lots of things that could happen in conversations between the governor's office and the legislature for what that amount is going to be, that add-on for those rich class ratios. And we saw that shift at Bay Revision. It went down a little bit at the total level because ADA levels have dropped, but also a little bit less as a total amount per ADA for that 10-to-1 ratio. I think the other thing to note here, again, and for those who, I apologize, heard me say this just over an hour ago, those are ongoing resources adding in a tight fiscal year, right? So we know that the state is using one-time dollars to fill the LCFF. We know that they're using one-time dollars from the rainy day fund. We know that they are deferring a significant amount of money. So those ongoing dollars that are being proposed for the TK add-on are very valuable. And so if the legislature is thinking maybe schools don't need quite that much, maybe we can still do the add-on in 25-26, but maybe we'll dial it down a little bit, and then we can dial something up somewhere else for ongoing resources. So, we know that TK for all is a big priority in the legislature. So I think that there will be something there, but just how much is still very much an open question. At school services, we want to make sure that districts are thinking about how do they implement that with the resources that they can expect. And again, right now, that's sort of an unknown for how much that's going to end up when sort of all the dust settles on the budget conversations.
And our guest is Michelle Underwood, Vice President over at School Services of California. If you have any questions, go ahead and put those into the chat. Neri and Deanna, I did see your questions, so we'll try and tackle both of those near the end of our broadcast. Michelle, the proposal to fund LCFF using the rainy day fund, with the economy in flux, how worried do we need to be about draining that public education rainy day fund? And we know that this proposal defers paying that until July 26th. So this seems to be a budget maneuver. Does that kick the can down the road for some of the challenging times ahead?
Definitely. I mean, we've got a couple of, whatever you want to call them, maneuvers, if we want to call them novel approaches, there's many that are built in, again, to keep Proposition 98 together. So you mentioned some of them. So we've got the use of rainy day funds. Remember that just in, 22-23, we had $8 billion in the rainy day fund, and then it goes zeroed out completely. Then we think that there's going to be more needing to go in based on the formula. Turns out there's not a deposit, there's a withdrawal. So you see really the significant ebbs and flows with the rainy day fund. Now, is it better than having nothing at all? Yes. But when we get to the other side of using those rainy day funds, again, we're at zero. There's no sort of nest egg for that. I can tell you in the legislature, they're very concerned about zeroing out the rainy day fund. They tried really hard to get money in, even in the tight fiscal year of 24-25. And so that may be one of those places where they're just not comfortable going all the way down to zero if they can avoid it. One of the other sort of novel approaches this year is the under appropriation. Again, whatever you want to call it, future settle up of the Proposition 98 guarantee. The governor proposed it in January to not fully fund 24-25 with the settle up amount of money that we would normally expect. It was $1.6 billion that we would have expected in January for him to say how he was going to appropriate it. That has lowered just a little bit as the Proposition 98 guarantee has lowered a little bit. So it's $1.3 billion that the governor doesn't currently have a plan for. And the sort of promise in the future is that before we get to the end of all the settle up timelines in Proposition 98, whatever is owed to schools will be provided to schools. But those are dollars that I'm sure schools would appreciate having right now. We've calculated that on a per ADA basis of over $200 per ADA. If those dollars were going out to schools and their needs now. So I think, when you look at the other one is deferrals. So on the K-12 side, $1.8 billion being deferred from 25-26 to 26-27. You have another $500 million or so on the community college side. And those are dollars that will need to be repaid when we get to the next fiscal year. So a lot of sort of, twine and tape and paper clips to keep Proposition 98 together. And I think there should be a real concern, especially as we're, uncertain on the California economy, what 25-26 is going to look like. And if we've really sort of, as a state, have it figured out, what those revenues are going to look like when there's so much uncertainty, especially at the federal level.
No, I think that just underscores, I think, what we've all been kind of thinking about here over the last week, right? That hey, like you said at the beginning, it could be, all things considered, it's okay budget, but it's really what is this going to mean in the out years, right? So I think I appreciate just that perspective. You just went into a number of details, Michelle, in terms of those things that you and your team have really dove into, and obviously that's one of the things we love about school services is the finer details of these budgets. What would you say is one thing that maybe has been overlooked or not getting enough attention relating to what the governor's proposal, the revised proposal, that our folks should be aware of, and maybe it's not getting all that much publicity?
Yeah, so I'm going to avoid getting too much into the Prop 98 weeds and into the split between community colleges and K-12, but I'll let you know that I represent the community college version of ACSA called ACA. So I'm
We don't like their
aware.
acronym as much as ours.
Yeah.
It's close.
So they are very aware of the governor's proposal to move money from the community college budget, the side of Prop 98, that has grown because of the rebenching of Prop 98 due to TK. So they've been getting their historic split of 10.93%. As TK has been putting more money into Prop 98, they've been getting that money. And this year at the May revision, the governor says, well, that doesn't make sense. All those TK dollars should go to K-12. TK-12 should go to TK students. So we're going to pull that money, both the current year, past year, and ongoing, from the community college portion of Prop 98 and plop it over in the K-12 portion. So that helps the K-12 side of the budget to the tune of about $500 million and about $230 million ongoing. So that's a fight within Prop 98 that we're sort of not used to seeing. Usually it's a very clear split of here's the 10.93 to community colleges, here's the bulk to K-12, TK-12, and it's sort of, the legislature decides within those two buckets how to spend the money. But this is really a shift from one side of Prop 98 community colleges over to the other side, TK-12. And I think that's an issue. Again, that's about $500 million upon which the TK-12 portion of Proposition 98 is built. So if the legislature disagrees with pulling those dollars from community colleges because of the damage it's doing on that side of Prop 98, and decides not to pull it over to TK-12, or maybe they do it prospectively instead of retroactively, that is part of the structure of the TK-12 budget that they would need to fix if they decide not to take so much. The interesting thing here, the Legislative Analyst's Office, because budget hearings are already starting, they kicked off yesterday, the Legislative Analyst's Office suggests, instead of sort of focusing on that historic split and taking out portions before you get into the calculation, the legislature should just decide how much each side needs and go from there. And again, as a person who works on both sides of Prop 98, that could potentially create, some really difficult conversations within the Proposition 98 guarantee that we sort of take for granted that we're not going to have to fight with our community college counterparts.
Michelle, let me ask Neri's question. And Deanna, I see that you asked a question too. We just want to make sure that we ask the question correctly. If you wouldn't mind giving us the information on the CPA, what that acronym is. Since there are so many acronyms in public education, we want to make sure we get that right. Michelle, Neri asks, where is adult ed in the revise? You talked about the separation there, community colleges and TK through 12, but where does adult education fit in the May revision?
Yeah, not a bunch of proposals for adult education, cost of living adjustment only. So that's why you're not hearing us talk too much about that. A little bit on the sort of adult ed front is the master plan for career education that again sort of straddles K-12 and community colleges. A lot of the proposals that were pushed out in January have been scaled back or completely withdrawn, again with sort of the tighter fiscal environment at the May revision. So not significant changes in adult education and less of a push at the career education level than we saw in January.
Deanna asked a clarified Naj's question there. Anything you could tell us about the California Partnership Academy grants relating to CTE?
That is not one that's on my radar. I know that the governor is very interested in, community partnerships and, whole approach to students. So that's one that we'd have to look some further detail into.
Michelle, let me ask you this one final question. We know legislators now get their next pass at the May budget. What's your prediction? What's going to happen? What's that one thing that is something big that could happen before it makes its way to the governor's desk?
I think the safest prediction is that the legislature is going to do something by June 15th, because if they don't do something, then they don't get paid. We see that very well, motivating our legislators to do that job and do it on time. And that is not what we see at the federal level. I work in both worlds there too, at the state level and federal level. So I think, we can definitely expect the legislature to get that budget done on time. It won't be all the way done, because they're going to continue to negotiate with the governor. I think one of the things that I've got my eye on the most, in addition to the UTK funding shift from community colleges to TK-12, I think the other big thing that I'm thinking about is those discretionary block grant dollars. So you'll remember that back in January, the governor proposed $1.8 billion for that block grant, only minorly changed in May from 1.8 to 1.7 billion. And one of the things that the legislature seems eager to do is to change the allocation of those dollars from a per average daily attendance to something perhaps more weighted, like the LCFF, towards unduplicated pupils. The other thing that we are potentially likely to see in that space is more restrictions on those dollars. So they're not, free and clear for locals to decide how to use those dollars locally. I think that's another thing that I'm really going to keep my eye on. And then also, again, that new idea of the under appropriation. I know the education community, the education management community is pushing really hard against sort of that newest manipulation of Proposition 98 to not pay until sort of later, much later in the process than we're used to. I might get in a little trouble calling it a manipulation, but that is something I think that a lot of people are concerned about, really setting that precedent of not funding when we're historically used to being funded for that settle up and having to wait in the future. So that also, we'll have to see how concerned the legislature is with creating a new sort of Prop 98 mechanism not to send monies out to school, and see if they do something else. Sort of the something else's are, maybe they put that $1.3 billion into the rainy day fund. Maybe they put it into some one-time funds, and maybe they appropriate it later in case those dollars don't show up. I think we recognize that the state is in a difficult budgeting situation, and we want to make sure that that difficult budgeting situation isn't pushed on us and pushed on our students and our programs.
All right, Michelle Underwood, Vice President, School Services of California, our brand new budget expert here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Michelle, thank you so much for being with us. It's been an honor to have you here on the lunch break. We look forward to having you next time.
It's my pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Edgar, I mentioned 5-year anniversary, which is next week. Our incredible production team behind the scenes has put together a quick video of what we look like. It just happened.
Wait, I thought we just found this out.
I know. This is how quick they work. That's you and I doing the very first show. We obviously
that's when Wes was in charge and we didn't have any budget. So,
I know we had zero.
Look how much we've upgraded.
We had zero budget, to the point where I had to go sit in my wife's classroom to be able to do the show, because and you in the living room.
And we didn't know anything about camera frames, and apparently Michael didn't know how to tell us to tilt down the camera back then either.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. So there you go. 5 years
we were all
ago.
learning.
Next week is our first edition. May 27th. And it's funny, we're not going to be on next Wednesday, which would be the 28th, but we will certainly have to acknowledge a big celebration for our 5th anniversary.
My biggest reflection from watching that video, Naj, is that, and I think folks know when we make fun of what was going on there. The reason you're in the classroom where I'm at home, this is in the middle of the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
And that was the origin of our show. But my biggest takeaway is that in the middle of the pandemic, where folks, I was probably wearing shorts on that particular day.
Yeah.
You were still fully suited up. Suit and tie never fails. That's not just consistent, if nothing else there.
Well, nobody saw that I was wearing basketball shorts and flip-flops under the jacket, but that's fine. That's how the anchor people operate. You just never know. Folks, got a couple of things to tell you about. First, ACSA's Summer Principals Institute that comes your way June 23rd through 27th at the University of Laverne. This is one of the premier professional development events that we put on every single year. There's so much positivity, so much that we pour into this professional development opportunity. That's our ACSA Summer Leadership Institute, June 23rd through 27th. You can click on that QR code once the show is done, or go to ACSA.org/professional-learning for more information and registration on that. Folks, if you like what you've seen here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, we invite you to like us on Facebook, follow us on YouTube, or on LinkedIn. When you do, you'll get instant alerts when Edgar and I are going to come on with breaking news, and of course reminders about our regular Wednesday show here. And if you have great stories happening in your school communities, we want to tell those stories too. Go ahead and send in your photos, your news releases, your talking points to our EdCal editor, Michelle Carl, at mcarl@axa.org. Also want to remind you about the Critically Conscious Classroom, the ACSA web series. You can catch that on our DEI page on our ACSA website, or you can see it here on YouTube as well.
I'm doing double duty, Naj. I'm gonna be a guest on the Critically Conscious Classroom tomorrow. You might like it better there, and maybe may not come back here.
You may. Okay, well, if that's your exit strategy here as we celebrate our 5th anniversary, you certainly made it known for all of our viewers.
I guess I should refrain from any announcements.
Yeah, thank you for that, folks. The Critically Conscious Classroom starts 2 p.m. tomorrow on the ACSA website and here on YouTube. Folks, thanks so much for being with us here on the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. A reminder, we are here Wednesdays, 1 p.m. on ACSA Facebook, ACSA YouTube, and our LinkedIn account. Have a great rest of the day and rest of the week, and we'll see you next time.